Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 2, Episode 6, entitled Melora. This episode aired October 31st, 1993. Before we start on this episode, anything you want to say about the previous podcast?
No, it was perfect.
I think it was perfect because I don't even remember it. We took a week off and I don't even remember what happened.
Well, we are recording 2 in 1 week, so...
Yes, we'll pay the price for taking the week off for sure. The only thing I wanted to say is we've given up on the experiment of sharing the duties of describing scenes. You were not enjoying it.
I wouldn't say I wasn't enjoying it. I would just need a lot more practice at it. I think I would need to actually have a dress rehearsal.
Oh.
Which would cause the whole thing to double in the length of time it took to actually record a single episode.
If we rehearsed it, though, the recording of it might go faster, but then the spontaneity of the conversation would not be as fun. Okay, well, let's get started.
Okay.
In the cold open, we start with Bashir giving a medical log on Stardate 47229.1. He and Chief O'Brien have been preparing for the arrival of a new cartographer. Ensign Melora Pazlar is the first Alasian to join Starfleet, and she requires some special accommodations. Then we go to the infirmary, where Bashir is testing a wheelchair that he built for the new ensign according to her specifications.
Ah, this is the ADA episode.
Right. He tells Dax that her normal anti-grav unit won't work on the station because Cardassian construction just isn't compatible. Then Kira calls to say the Yellowstone has just docked at Airlock 14. Bashir is very excited, and he and Dax head out with the wheelchair.
So what does Bashir actually mean that the Cardassian construction isn't compatible?
Well, I don't know, because he says her normal anti-grav unit. What does that mean exactly? What is her normal anti-grav unit? We never see it.
Is it something she carries around, or...?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question.
It seems like a bit of a MacGuffin to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm trying to come up with an answer to your question, but I don't know what it means.
Good, it wasn't just me.
Dax and Bashir enter the promenade, and Bashir is talking about Melora as coming from a planet with low surface gravity, which is why she needs assistance. Miles rushes up to them saying he's done the best he can with the ramps, as they've obviously not had a reason to make the station more accessible before this.
I'm assuming the Cardassians just execute their disabled people.
Well, that's another reference to them being like the Nazis.
I think so.
Right?
They don't make any consideration for people who are differently abled, so yeah.
Or even just different aliens, right?
Yeah.
I guess why would they think that if they're Cardassians and they're taking over that station and it's intended to be, because it was a labor camp, right?
Yes, or reprocessing, or processing rather.
Did you notice here Morn in the background?
Yes, I did. My note is, hooray, Morn's back.
Hooray! He's on a little holiday and now he's back. Bashir modified the maximum vertical clearance of the chair 3 centimeters to a slope of 56 degrees, but that still leaves a lot of places in the station that she won't be able to access. Dax wonders why they can't just use the transporter to help her get around, but Miles says she sent word that it wasn't acceptable to her. Bashir gushes about her, saying he studied her personnel and medical files, and she went through Starfleet Academy the same way, with no special assistance once her basic needs were met. He says she's extraordinary. Dax and Miles see that he's maybe a little obsessed with her already. Bashir asks Miles if her quarters are ready, and Miles says he's got the bumps on his head to prove it, and he hands a little device to Bashir before leaving.
Bashir does actually seem to be surprisingly considerate here. He does actually seem to want to go and make the effort to make the station compatible with her.
This is not a Bashir we know. We have never met this guy before.
I know already, right?
Yeah.
He seems to care about how she can get around and is making these preparations.
Although he does creep a little on her, but we'll talk about that. Bashir takes the device from Miles and drops it into a pocket on the chair and says that will be something to see when we switch off the gravity and she flies around the room.
Won't she be like really tall? If she's from a low gravity planet, perhaps wouldn't they grow very high because they don't have a lot of gravity? Well, I suppose it's relative, really.
Yeah, it would be relative. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. We go now to Melora in the airlock. She is struggling to walk, grasping the wall and panting. She's also wearing some equipment around her shoulders, down her arms and legs, obviously to help make her mobile in this foreign environment for her. She takes one step at a time using a cane. Dax and Bashir enter and everyone introduces themselves. She starts toward the chair and Dax offers to help, but Melora quickly snaps that she's fine. Bashir gives Dax a look and they follow Melora out into the passageway. It's like we're not off to a great start.
Yes.
She sits in the chair and says, "You've modified the chair." He says, "Yes, I wanted to give you as much mobility as I could." She says she's been practicing on the model she requested for a month, which is something you really should have thought of, Julian. But she's like, well, I'll just have to adapt. They look at each other again like, well, she's a little snippy. But A, they should know she's going to be defiant based on the warning signs that she's already given them.
Yes.
And B, you just change the equipment from what she specifically asked for so she knows that you're already overreaching and you're already kind of coddling her. So yeah, there's a couple mistakes right out of the gate.
Yeah. They kind of pulled the rug out of her by changing the thing that she was practicing on.
Yeah,
like
that's
you said.
Incredibly rude.
Yeah. And if you had researched her fully, if you were going to make a change like that, you should tell her up front.
So that she could tell you not to do it.
Right.
So that she could say the very simple thing of, I've been practicing on this other one for a month. You're just making it harder for me.
I just don't think Bashir thought this thing all the way through.
Sometimes, though, on every TV show, they force a conflict.
Yes. They're deliberately painting her as somebody who is difficult.
Yes.
Sort of deliberately. I want you to not like this character.
Right. At least in the beginning.
And another thing here, I was sure this was a Next Generation episode. When this episode started, I'm like, I remember this, but wasn't this the Next Gen?
It feels like a Geordi episode.
Oh, yeah. It totally would be.
As they head to Melora's quarters, Dax says she'll be accompanying her on the survey mission. Melora is irked and says she doesn't need extra help to do her job. Dax points out that Sisko wouldn't let any ensign take a runabout into the Gamma Quadrant the day after they arrived on the station. Melora feels like the chief science officer must have better things to do than chart a sector in the Gamma Quadrant. They arrive in the hallway outside of her quarters, and it's so dark. Like it's not safely lit. That's what I wrote down. Julian opens the door, and before she enters, she asks if he's also modified the specifications for her quarters, and fortunately for him, he says not one iota. Then he points out the device she can use to control the gravity unit. She says thanks and goes into the quarters, closing the door behind her really quickly. And we've set the stage for this episode. Julian is already in love with her, and Dax is nonplussed. Cue the theme song.
It seemed kind of odd that an ensign was being snippy to two senior officers.
Yeah, she has a chip on her shoulder, and I don't see how as an ensign you get away with that kind of behavior in Starfleet. We go now to the bar, and Quark is showing some alien an ugly gold bracelet. The alien says, Paltress only created 80 of these, each a work of art. Quark says he's come into the possession of 42 of them. The alien says, my world will honor your name for returning the rings of Paltress to his birthplace.
Uh-oh. We know what's coming here.
Quark says, honor my name all you like, as long as your honor is accompanied by 199 bars of gold pressed latinum.
Wouldn't that be 199.99?
To keep it under 200? Another alien enters the bar behind them. This dude is tall. He has very curly hair, a split down the middle of his forehead, and what can only be described as a handle that goes from his forehead down his nose and connects to his chin.
Oh, that's funny. I thought it looked like a beak.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's shaped like a scorpion or a seti eel, but it looks like a handle you would grab. Like an easy way to pull him around.
Oh, okay. It's got a carrying handle built in.
It does not feel like a good evolutionary move for the species.
No.
Anyway, this guy scares Quark, and some very ominous music plays as they stare at each other. He calls him Fallet Cott and says, is it really you? Fallet says it's been 8 long years. Quark ushers him to a table and flatters him, saying he looks terrific. Tan, toned up. The guy says, you don't keep extra weight on where I've been. Quark laughs uncomfortably, and Fallet leans very close to Quark and says, I've come to kill you, Quark. And that's when I realized that this was crazy Joe Davola from Seinfeld.
Although, I have a feeling he probably needs to take a number. Quark must have made a lot of enemies.
Yeah. We go to Sisko's office, and Bashir and Dax are giving Sisko a report on Melora. They stop talking when they hear her chair approaching. Sisko says, welcome, Ensign, and introduces himself. He puts out his hand to shake, but she doesn't respond. She says, am I late? It looks as though the meeting has already begun. Which feels like quite a slight for an ensign, even though I doubt other species have that same handshaking thing. But if she went through Starfleet, she must be aware of what this is.
Yes, it's the human cultural norm to shake hands. Well, until there's a pandemic.
Yeah, not so much in 2020. Maybe 2020 marks the end of that, and this was just all wrong in the future.
Yeah. Who should be doing the fist bump?
Right.
Sisko's been very charming, I thought.
He was being very charming, and he seemed quite happy to see her, and she was not happy to see him.
Yeah.
Sisko says Dax and Bashir were just telling him about her request to pilot a runabout alone. She unhooks herself from her chair and stands up with the use of her cane. She says it would have been more appropriate to include her in the conversation. As they climb a couple of steps together, Sisko explains that he discusses personnel issues with his senior staff all the time. She says she must seem overly sensitive. Yes, but she's used to being shut out of the Melora problem. And the truth is, there is no Melora problem until people create one. Then she drops down into a chair in Sisko's office. It's probably quite frustrating to have people constantly trying to help you and solve a problem that they think you are.
Yeah.
When you just want to do your job and not be looked at as constantly needing help.
At the same time, she's acting incredibly entitled for just an ensign.
Right.
Sisko is the commander of a station.
Yeah, no, I agree. Her behavior is totally inappropriate in front of the commanding officer.
Yeah.
Or anyone who ranks above her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It does not seem unreasonable that the ensign would not get to take a shuttle out on their own and go into the Gamma Quadrant on their own.
No, she's brought a lot of baggage with her, as I'm sure she's had to put up with this her whole career. So she's assigning all of those crappy things that have happened to her to these people, and they just seem like they're treating her like an ensign.
Right. I'm going to add, this does remind me of the short treks. Do you remember the one called The Trouble with Edward with John Benjamin and Rosa Salazar?
The one with the tribbles?
Yes, that's the one. And you remember John Benjamin plays this like awful character who's sort of entitled and thinks he's smarter? This is what's popping into my head. Because I think it's the Rosa who says, how did you get this far in Starfleet?
Yes. But she seems quite competent.
That's kind of the funny thing about it. I mean, he was clearly very good as a geneticist, but completely lacked common sense or ethics.
I don't know. That wasn't for me.
Oh, I loved it. You remember how much I laughed at that one.
Yes. I like my humor in Star Trek to be organic.
Ah, gotcha.
I'm not so much into the farce. But I get it. I get why people thought it was funny.
It was funny.
She continues to be a little snippy, saying that she doesn't understand why the doctor is even involved, as she doesn't need medical help. Dax looks tired of this whole discussion. Julian looks a little stung, and Sisko is trying to smooth the whole thing over. She says she simply objects to being treated like someone who is ill. Sisko says nobody is doing that. She tells him no one else can quite understand her situation, as she's moved from one chair to another since leaving her homeworld. Only a handful of people have ever left her planet because of the gravity issues, but she dreamt about exploring the stars as a child, and she wasn't going to allow any handicap, a chair, or a Cardassian station to stop her from chasing that dream. She reiterates her desire to work alone, saying she's achieved all that she's achieved without being dependent on anyone. Sisko is not comfortable sending her into the Gamma Quadrant alone. If she knew it's come from the Gamma Quadrant, I don't know why the heck she would want to go there alone, but...
Yes. So far, there hasn't been anything good.
No, she keeps trying to convince him, but he just says, Lieutenant Dax will be going with you.
Finally, he lays down the law.
Yes.
He is the ranking officer here. Follow the chain of command.
She stands up, panting, and says, yes, sir, and she struggles to the door, saying they leave tomorrow at 7:30.
The only way I'd see her getting around that is she said to Sisko that she'd be more efficient if she took the shuttle so she could turn the gravity off, which would make it inconvenient for Dax.
Gosh, what a good point. She never said that.
Yeah.
That would have been a very good point. But I think they were much more focused on the ADA part of the story than they were on something like that. Yeah, on the science-y part of it.
Right.
Gosh, that's a good point.
Here's my opinion. This was just crappy writing to make a character unlikable because there was no really good reason for it.
It was such a stereotype, I felt. And at first I was curious about who wrote this, and I looked it up. And did you look it up?
I did not.
The person who wrote it is actually a person who is in a wheelchair.
Oh.
So this was his idea of a story, and he felt uniquely qualified to write it, which I imagine that he is, for sure. He doesn't have any experience in space, but he certainly has experience with these things that this character was going through.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting, but it just still, even though it was written from the perspective of someone who would really understand this situation, it felt like a stereotype. And I think because she just seems like she has such a chip on her shoulder, which is the way I imagine that somebody stupid like me would write it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It didn't seem insightful. It felt reductive.
Oh, that's a great description, yes.
I almost feel like there are two ways that these kinds of stories usually get written.
Yeah.
One is this way, with this character who is very angry and defensive. And then the other is sort of way on the other side, where the person is maybe unrealistically heroic and unrealistically stoic. And there's never quite that human part right in the middle. I feel like we get there with her a little bit later, but we're starting off on a bad foot.
Yes. And I think this setup is done deliberately to do that.
Yes.
It feels just so clunky.
It feels forced.
Yeah.
Bashir is walking through the very dark, very blue hallway toward Melora's quarters. He hesitates but rings her bell. He hears a humming sound that stops just before the door opens, and he finds Melora sitting in her chair. He asks if the low graph field actuator is working, and she says it's working fine. He looks around, and he says, so you were just, he wants to say flying around the room, but he doesn't. She compares it to slipping into a hot tub at the end of a long day. Bashir awkwardly says he's a shower man himself, like not getting what she's saying, which is that when you slip into a hot tub, you can feel a little bit weightless. You can sort of feel gravity changing as you do that, and this has nothing to do with being in a shower, so I don't know. Sometimes, Bashir. Then he grabs a photo that she has sitting on the desk and says, is this your husband? Do you remember on Picard, there was just all this nonsense, people going crazy about there being physical photos, how there'd be no physical photos in the future because Soji has a bunch of pictures. Oh, look, here's one in an actual metal picture frame in Deep Space Nine in 1993.
But wouldn't you want to do that anyway? We don't need pictures today, and I still like having framed pictures.
Well, sure. You want something to look at. I mean, I guess the difference is you could put up something maybe holographic in the future, but that technology, they couldn't really make that work or look good or look better than a photo at that point. And I'm not really sure we can do that now either. But I just thought it was funny that there was all this stink about how she would never have photos. And then here we are back in Deep Space Nine with a photo.
I think it's funnier that another culture, which is evolved independently, likes to have photos in frames too.
Yeah. She doesn't answer Bashir's clunky question. Instead, she says, if you came for an apology, I apologize. She hadn't intended to attack him personally. And he says, oh, you never set out to attack anyone personally, but you do seem to attack a lot. She says, that's rather insensitive of you, doctor. Julian says, oh, I'm no longer your doctor, remember? She says, I see, you've decided I need a friend. Oh, he says, was that an attack? You see, you do it so well, with such charm. It's hard to tell. All of these broad shots you fire, they're just your way of keeping the rest of the universe on the defensive. You're too good at it. She says, well, it's always worked well, until now. He says, that's the nicest thing you've said to me or anyone else. Then he asks if she wants to go to dinner. And dancing afterwards, she asks. Oh, red alert, Bashir says. She laughs and says she's sorry. And he says there's a new Klingon restaurant open on the promenade, if you like that sort of thing. And she agrees. And then we go to an ad break.
I thought this was fascinating that Bashir was actually picking up on this, that she's using it as a defense mechanism. And at the same time, also going to ask her to dinner in a non-creepy way.
Yeah, I have things to say about that.
Well, I thought he was being friendly, not creepy.
The problem is, he's established himself as a creep.
Right.
If we had started here, I would have a different opinion. Because this is not creepy. This is actually a lovely conversation. It's actually a little bit too insightful based on his history. He's shown no signs of being able to read other people, women in particular.
Yeah.
Zero signs of it up till now. All of a sudden, he's super insightful, and he's being polite and sincere.
Well, let's point out that this is not the Bashir from season 1 already.
This is not the Bashir from season 1.
Yeah, we've already seen Bashir completely change, as if the writers went, this isn't the guy we were aiming at.
It's jarring.
Yes.
Now we go to Quark's, and the guy with the SETI eel handle face is hanging out at a table there. At this point, we see the top of his head, and he has multiple small spikes. And he's also sitting in kind of red lighting. And so he's got a bit of a devil character look about him, which is so funny. And he's still crazy Joe Davola.
I'm just happy we're back to basing episodes in Quarks. That I think is very important.
True.
Also, 1314, Morn. Hurrah!
Hurrah! Twice. Quark and Rom appear and drop a tablecloth on his table, saying, dinner is served. Quark says, what better way to satisfy a hungry traveler?
Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me.
Right. But this plan doesn't go well, as he first dumps the soup out onto Quark's shoes. Then Quark tries to convince him to play Dabo, and he brings over some women to teach him the game. There's some serious underboob on display in this costume. It's just ridiculous.
Wow, that's a lot of underboob for a network show in the 90s.
Right.
That was remarkable.
TVPG. Quark says he's trying to make his stay pleasurable, and he tries to propose a toast. To old friends, but Fallot says, old debts.
Ouch. So we know this is Quark's fault somehow.
And we also know he's doing his usual. He's on brand groveling.
Yeah.
Trying to pretend like everything's fine.
Yep.
We go to the Klingon restaurant, which appears to be a counter-order system with some Klingon symbols above the very large Klingon dude who's taking the orders.
This is awesome. Deep Space Nine now has a food court.
I know. It totally does.
There'll be a Cinnabon next.
That would be awesome. Bashir orders a bunch of disgusting things like worms on a plate. And the guy just grabs all the stuff with his hands, puts it on a plate, and hands it to Julian. It's quite gross. He then hands it to Melora, who starts speaking Klingon loudly to the chef. They appear to argue, but then he chuckles, and he says, I like a customer who knows what she wants. And he grabs the plate of worms, and he just throws it over his shoulder. It was hysterical.
You talk about on brand. That was so perfectly on brand for Klingons.
That was so funny. He then makes her a new plate of different worms, and she says, there's nothing worse than a plate of half-dead Aracht. The Klingon hands the plate to Julian, who appears to pay him with a coin, and the guy bites the coin, and then they take their food and leave. And then we see those dumb aliens from the TNG episode.
Yes.
Come up to the counter, the Pakleds.
Yep.
Who appeared harmless and dopey but caused a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Geordi especially.
Oh, yeah. I actually went back and rewound that and watched it. And
did too.
Wait a minute, it's those guys.
Yes. I guess they appear multiple times, I found on Memory Alpha. Anyway, then we have to have a close-up of Bashir eating a gummy worm. It's like, oh my god, that was uncalled for. He tells Melora a story about when he was 10 and he was on the planet Invernia 2 with his father, a Federation diplomat. They were on a remote part of the planet when they were hit by a massive ionic storm. While they were waiting it out, they found an Invernian girl about his age who was sick. After the storm cleared, his father went for help, but it was too late. He sat there and watched her die. When his father returned the next day, he learned they could have treated her with a simple herb that was growing all around them. He could have saved her life. Melora asks if that's when he started to study medicine, but he says he first studied tennis, but he wasn't very good. This is a much better version of Julian than the jerk who was telling the stories about his Starfleet medical exams. I mean, this is like a human being.
Yeah, he seems to be talking to her like someone he wants to be friendly with. Yes. Rather than creep on.
Look, this could be his story about, when I was 10.
Oh.
Because it's a pretty good story.
You go straight to the negative.
Well, of course. To me, it's still Bashir from season 1. He has not yet redeemed himself enough.
I got you.
I see him doing it, but he hasn't gone far enough yet.
And a small thing to point out here. So they still play tennis, possibly competitively then. As you said, he wasn't very good at it. But they don't have baseball?
Somebody was just ragging on baseball.
I still think that they'd have all the sports. They'd be more popular than ever because you could pursue them as a career.
I wonder if somebody was trying to make a point about maybe what was going on in baseball at the time of the writing of this show.
Yeah.
Was this like when they were doing collective bargaining agreement fights or something?
Oh, well, the strike
It was around that time. Melora says she has an early mission and needs some rest, and the date ends very abruptly. I think she was like, don't want to get too close.
So, did you see this as a date?
2 of them were out together. They went to a restaurant, and they were talking about personal stuff. I mean, you know what I mean? I'm using it generically, I guess.
Okay.
The next morning, Dax arrives at Melora's quarters in the dark hallway. Although they appear to have turned the lights up a little bit, maybe she complained.
Why do we have 40-watt bulbs in the corridors?
It was so dark, and that was so weird. I don't know. They're trying to save money. I don't know. But Melora isn't home, and she's not responding to hails. Dax asks the computer to locate her and learns that she's on docking level 22, section 14. And Dax goes, section 14? Like she's totally baffled by this. And then next we go to section 14, and Dax finds Melora out of her chair. She's on the floor, her equipment appearing to malfunction as she can't get control of her legs. Dax turns off the malfunctioning equipment so her leg stops moving involuntarily and helps her to her chair. Melora says it was her own fault. She decided she needed an extra astrometric array after going through the mission profile again, and she came to the storage bay to get one. She says her mind was already in the Gamma Quadrant and she wasn't paying enough attention to what she was doing, and she fell on her control when she tripped over the lip of the door. Dax calls Bashir saying that Ensign Paslar had a minor accident and they're coming to the infirmary. He says he'll be there in 3 minutes. Melora wonders what kind of an architect would deliberately design a raised rim at the entrance to every door, which is an awesome question.
Cardassians.
Yeah. Just trolling people, making them trip.
Did you see here when she lifted Melora back onto the chair? They did some kind of effect where it made it look like Dax, she weighed nothing and Dax was just, picking her up really easily.
Like 3 times.
Yeah.
Yes. That was either a really good effect or...
Dax is very, very strong.
She was lifting weights. I don't know. She was very strong. She just appeared to pick her up and move her like a rag doll.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did this. I'm giving it to the actress. I think she just picked her up. It was amazing. Why not? Now we go to the infirmary, and Bashir is tending to Melora's injuries, and she's complaining that she didn't even make it to the Gamma Quadrant yet. She's very upset that she was flopping back and forth like a broken toy. She didn't want anyone to find her like that, but she couldn't get up by herself. Bashir asks why she didn't wait for Dax before going to an area that was unmodified with ramps. I didn't need Dax if I just paid attention. She's very focused on how she was capable, but yet she tripped, right? She's not blaming anything else. It's just like, I could have solved this problem myself.
Right. She doesn't want to be constrained, seems to be very much the story here.
And she doesn't want to appear to have a failing.
Right, yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word.
No, that is the right word. But this is sort of hitting what's been going on, is she doesn't want to be restricted in what she can do because her abilities exceed her physical abilities.
Yeah. Bashir says no one on the station is completely independent, which I think we have seen because this place is quite a death trap.
Yeah.
She says, I just want you all to know you can depend on me. You've proven that, he says. Now, what do the rest of us have to do to convince you that you can depend on us?
That's a very good point.
This is just some Julian person I do not know. This is Alien Julian. The jerk from season 1 has gone somewhere else, which is great. I hope he never comes back.
Yes. It's such a departure from season 1.
It really is. It's kind of funny.
You mentioned the jarring. Yes. Julian season 1 for me is jarring, and this is more like the Julian that everybody knows and loves.
Not such a cartoon character.
Yeah.
I just don't buy it yet. I hope too soon. Now we go back to the dark hallway, and they're heading to her quarters again. Julian asks if she's heard of the work Nathaniel Teros did with low-gravity species 30 years ago. She says neuromuscular adaptation had no practical success at all. No, Bashir says, but the principles are sound, and a lot of progress has been made in neurochemistry since then.
She seems very multidisciplined at this point, if she has an understanding of relatively obscure or specialist science journals or publications.
Yeah, but this is very specific to something that she would be interested in.
Yeah.
It was probably brought up to her, and she probably looked into it as, is there some kind of a future for me here? Because the next question she asks is, someday maybe I'll be able to throw away the chair.
Okay.
And he says, theoretically, perhaps. When they arrive in her quarters, he stands outside of her door, not wanting to intrude in her low-gravity time. Again, who is this guy? She invites him in and tells him to brace himself, which he doesn't really do. He just puts his hand on the wall. And then she flies out of her chair like Peter Pan. And she does some flips around the room and then tries to help him fly. And he immediately flips around. And she says, people are always surprised by this and treat her like a carnival attraction. And that's why she usually keeps people out, which I imagine is true.
Yeah, well, seeing people fly. Although, I've got to admit, if we had holodecks, wow, wouldn't you want to be flying? Wouldn't you want to do the whole Superman thing?
Maybe.
Here's another question. If they're from a low-gravity planet, why wouldn't they have wings if they fly and it's really easy? Even if you have regular limbs, the wings would also give you additional ability to maneuver.
I think I can answer that simply.
What's that?
Budget. I was reading about the making of this scene.
Yeah.
And how they had to film it in such a way to be economical.
Oh.
And they only do it once.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
It's really good, actually.
Yeah.
It worked very well. For a wire act scene without a ton of CGI, it was a very effective scene.
But these TV shows in the 90s making 23, 24, whatever number of episodes it is, they didn't have budget to do anything more than this. And it was pretty good. But I would say that building some kind of a complex wing system would have been expensive.
Yeah.
Whereas now you could CGI that in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, they'd have the whole thing if she turns the gravity off and, like, a giant full set of wings comes out of her back.
Right. He thanks her for letting him in, and she says the picture on the desk is of her brother. So, of course, we have a soap opera kiss in the air, which is meant to be very romantic.
A low-gravity kiss.
That's all we see. We don't know what happened after that.
Although we see a window with the stars out, and I was honestly expecting Quark to be in a spacesuit looking in.
Like, voyeuristically?
Yeah.
Quark is distracted by this guy who wants to kill him. Next, the wormhole opens and a runabout comes through with Dax and Melora in it. Melora asks the computer to play some Vulcan music. Then they have some very uninteresting girl talk about romance in Starfleet, which the first time through this episode, I wrote it all down, and then the next time I deleted it all because it's terrible. It's badly written. No women were consulted in this conversation, and I don't want to repeat it.
Here's the thing with Dax. How could you really talk about relationships with Dax with someone who's 300 years old?
Right.
Has been male, female, and how they would relate to anybody who has like a single lifetime. It would be so different.
But she's uniquely qualified to see situations from all kinds of different angles that other people are not able to do.
Yeah.
She can't see it from Melora's point of view specifically because she hasn't had that experience.
You're right.
She has seen relationships from multiple points of view, but she has pointed out to us that she wasn't great at it, right? At least she said motherhood she wasn't great at. I don't remember if she wasn't great at relationships.
Being a parent, she wasn't good at it.
I think she has an interesting perspective, but it would be very difficult to take her advice because you don't have that same perspective, that same wisdom.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. You've put it succinctly.
The one thing that I think they missed here is, remember how excited Sisko was when Odo was talking to him about romance with Lwaxana?
Yeah.
This is a conversation she should have had with Sisko. He'd have been like, oh, romance.
That is funny.
He's the only one interested in that. It was adorable.
So they're having their bonding time and listening to Vulcan music. Now, do you remember in Wishes Were Horses, Bashir makes a comment about Vulcans aren't known for their imagination?
Yep.
Well, if Vulcans are composers and write music, some of which they make the comment about is quite creative and isn't like a Vulcan, it would require some kind of imagination or creativity.
Yeah.
So clearly my point about why wouldn't the Vulcans be imaginative?
Look, that episode was a bust. I don't think I put too much stock in it. If you just interact in a work environment with a Vulcan, you might find them to be very straight-laced, very focused, and even though I'm sure that they are, and we've seen evidence that they are very creative problem solvers, you might think that they lacked a colorful imagination just in that context.
Oh, that's a very good point. Right. Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Quark drops in on Odo in his office to tell him about Fallet. But Odo already knows all about the guy. He just finished 8 years at a labor camp for hijacking a shipment of Romulan ale. That seems like quite a sentence for stealing some ale.
For shoplifting.
I think it was trafficking in stolen goods.
Oh, clearly the Romulans are a law and order type.
Yeah. Well, here's the important part. Odo knows that Quark's name was also on the original indictment. So he assumes that Quark sold out the guy to save his own butt, which you know is what happened.
He did it to his own cousin.
Right. In typical Quark fashion, he says he had nothing to do with the hijacking itself. He was only the middleman. Quark says Fallet threatened to kill him, which makes Odo smile super creepily. It was so weird.
Once again, we see Odo totally enjoying Quark's discomfort.
Yes, it was bizarre. Quark says he can't change Fallet's mind, and Odo has to do something. Odo says he'll do his job. Now we go to medical, and Bashir is looking at a bunch of dots on a screen that show nothing and mean nothing when the door opens and Melora rides in. He says he's been waiting for her, and he has something to show her. It's a computer model of an elevated neural output from the brain's motor cortex. She says the neuromuscular adaptation theory? It was a theory 30 years ago, but with the development of neuroanaleptics transmitters, it's not even that complicated now. She's like, this could actually work? No more servo controls, no more chair, he says. She looks excited and also shocked.
This is TNG levels of technobabble.
Oh yeah, I wrote I actually typed into my notes, science words redacted. I started typing them all in, and then I just lost my mind with them because it's like, nobody knows what these things mean. I don't need to have all of them. And then I was like, delete, delete, delete.
I'm going to give Siddig a 10 out of 10 for just being able to say those lines and make it look like he's interested in them. It was just crazy.
I agree. There are many times where I back it up when he's saying all the science words, and I'm like, dude, you nailed that.
Yeah, and he really makes it seem like he knows what he's talking about. He seems very sincere.
He does.
I'll also add, we're starting to see as well, another thing here is just how smart Julian really is.
Yeah, he's been telling us how smart he is, and now he's starting to show it. We go back to Odo's office, and a Bajoran security officer is bringing Fallet in. Odo tells him they have something in common. He says, I don't like Quark either, but I can't let you kill him. Fallet downplays it, saying he wants to let bygones be bygones. But Odo says he can tell a man's intentions by the way he walks, and Fallet walks like someone who carries a lot of weight on his shoulders. He says it must be the memory of all those Romulan bricks I carried for 8 years. Must be, Odo says. Fallet says, well, you can't lock a man up for the way he walks. Then he leaves.
I bet the Cardassians would lock someone up for the way they walk.
Well, they probably would. I think Odo would too.
Only if Sisko would let him.
Right. The Cardassians would have let him.
He walks like a criminal.
He's clearly guilty. He's got a steady eel on his face. He's up to something. Outside of Odo's office, Odo's telling Quark that crazy Joe Davola is a man with nothing to lose, but he can't hold him for anything. He gives Quark a comm badge and says, call it the first sign of trouble. And Quark says, what if the first sign is the last sign? So great.
This scene was pretty humorous.
Well, Odo says, your people sell pieces of yourself after you die, right? Quark's like, yes. And Odo says, well, I'll buy one.
Oh, that was very touching that Odo would do that.
Oh, he was just making fun of Quark.
Enjoying Quark's discomfort.
I don't understand why Odo can't do anything about it. I often have these questions about what the law is on this station.
Yeah, what is Bajoran law? I mean, it's a Bajoran station, therefore surely Bajoran rules apply. Surely under Bajoran law, making threats to actually kill someone would maybe be questionable behavior.
Unless it's a Cardassian, which I'm sure they would allow.
Yeah, the guy from Duet just got a suspended sentence.
You're right. He probably got nothing. Now we go back to the infirmary, and Melora is on an exam bed, naked under a sheet. Why is she naked? It doesn't make any sense. Oh
Julian makes everybody who goes into medical do that. It's his thing.
Anyway, she says her heart is pounding, and Julian says, I'd like to think that has more to do with me than the neo-analeptics infusion. There's the Julian I don't like. Right there. There he is. She says, would that also explain why my backside is getting warm? And he says, well, that's more likely the result of the neuromuscular tissue stimulation due to the increased activity in the motor cortex. Sure, whatever.
I have to bring up the ethics here of why is Julian experimenting on his girlfriend?
That's a good question. She's literally a captive subject. I don't know. The ethics of the medical part of Starfleet is unique. It's different from today.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't be allowed to just start experimenting on someone. He tells her it's good she's already been using her muscles in this environment. It'll make it easier to adapt. He asks if she feels any different, and she says no, but after a few seconds, she finds that she can move her foot and then her leg.
Oh, it's Kill Bill.
He says her neural pathways are beginning to adapt. Endurance and coordination will take a while, but she should be walking within the hour. Julian and Melora come up the elevator into Ops, with Melora standing under her own power. I'll be damned, Miles says.
Oh, he misses the chance to say, bloody hell.
Drink.
Yeah.
It's almost like the new drink. Oh my God. Dax asks how Julian managed this, and he says, oh, it was simply a matter of increasing the output of the brain's motor cortex. This is where he slides into smug mode really easily.
Oh, not like we've seen.
No, but still.
He doesn't try to take all the credit. He actually talks about the work it was based on, which I thought was, again, another one of those little changes from the season one.
Yeah, because remember, which episode was it? It was The Passenger, where he was just like, oh, I impressed myself. I'm such a genius. You're so lucky to be around me.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, he's so different. Melora starts looking uncomfortable, and she suddenly starts to fall. He grabs her and says, easy does it. It's just the first day's treatment beginning to wear off. He turns on her wrist apparatus and says nothing to be concerned about, and says they should get her back to her quarters so she can get some rest. Sisko looks impressed as they leave, right? He actually looked like, hey, that guy did something.
Yeah, he then went and removed Bashir from the potential red shirts roster.
Oh, all of a sudden he's like, gee, maybe he could help.
Yeah.
Now we go to Melora's quarters, and Julian is saying, with each progressive treatment, she should get stronger and the effects will last longer. She sits down, panting. He tells her not to use the low-grav environment, as it would really confuse her motor cortex, which is a bummer. She can't use her warm bath.
Yeah.
She says, I understand. He says, you let me fly for the first time and I let you walk. We're even. Then he kisses her and says, see you in the morning, and he leaves. She looks less happy at this point than you might expect.
Yep. Here's the first sign. Something's up.
Now we go to Quark's quarters and the lights won't come on. This is never a good sign on any show ever in the history of television.
You walk in and the lights don't come on. You leave immediately.
You turn around and go right back out.
Yeah.
He does immediately recognize that there's a problem, but he's already gone too far into the room. Before he can call Odo on the comm badge, which he should have attached to himself, he should have been prepared for this. Fallet grabs him from behind and starts to strangle him.
If he'd had sense, he would have swapped his quarters with his brother's.
That would have been smart.
Yeah.
But Quark talks him out of killing him, which makes no sense if he's being strangled. But anyway, he talks him out of it by saying he can get him 199 bars of gold-pressed latinum. Fallet lets him go and says, that's a start. And then we go to an ad break.
Finally, Quark actually starting to negotiate. Why wouldn't he have started there? What can I give you to make you go away?
He started pretty high, though, 199. That's the entire amount he was going to get from those gold bracelets. You'd think he might have started a little bit lower. Negotiate.
Quark showing that he isn't really a great Ferengi when it comes to negotiating.
Right.
Or why doesn't he save some of that money and hire some mercenaries to protect himself? And then there could be a tragic accident, like Fallet falling out of an airlock.
That's almost so obvious. Why didn't he hire a bodyguard of some kind?
Yeah.
Maybe because he's just cheap.
You might have hit the nail on the head there.
Although he could have just told Rom to stand outside his quarters. Just stand here. Now we're back in the infirmary, and Melora is saying that the mattress felt like rocks and every one of her muscles ached all night long. Welcome to being a normal human.
Julian is still experimenting on his girlfriend.
Julian says she'll adjust to that, and this treatment should last several hours. She asks when the treatments become irreversible, and he asks if she's having second thoughts, and she says that last night she didn't feel like herself.
Ooh, cold feet. I think we all knew this was coming.
Yeah. He says this is the way to end her dependence on the chair and the servo controls, but she'll have to give up the low-grav environment to do it. He's worried that going back and forth would lead to a loss of fine motor control, and she might lose the ability to perform complex tasks. She said it seemed like a good trait at first, but now she's not sure. Bashir says the effects are fully reversible for the next few days, but after that, the motor cortex impulses will kick in on their own permanently.
That's not so good.
Not good if that's not what you want. Better think about it. Dax and Melora are in the shuttle again, and Melora turns on her apparatus controls as the treatment starts to wear off. She wonders out loud how she can have second thoughts about the treatments. She says she keeps thinking about home and how she wouldn't be able to go back there except for short visits. Dax says it's the Little Mermaid, the Earth fable where the mermaid trades her life under the sea for a pair of magic legs to walk on the land. Melora says, didn't she live happily ever after? Dax doesn't respond, and then she sighs. That story has a very weird ending, the original story. They didn't live happily ever after together, and she doesn't walk the earth with her magic legs. So, it went a little dark there.
It's not the Disney movie version.
No, and Dax doesn't say the Disney version. Why would she? We go back to the station, and Quark is meeting the guy from earlier who wanted the gold bracelets.
Who has a really big head.
By the way, this alien is played by Don Stark from that 70s show. It took me a bit to figure it out.
The way they made the makeup, his head is huge.
He does. Maybe he still had that afro from the 70s show.
Oh,
and they had to build the mask around it. That doesn't make any sense. The 70s show would have been after this. But not in timing, whatever.
Maybe he's a time traveler.
Maybe. Quark introduces Fallet as his longtime business partner, and Fallet takes the latinum and the bracelets and shoots the alien. It's like boom, boom, boom.
Ah, yes, he clearly does not have anything to lose.
But Quark shouts, a deal is a deal. Rule of acquisition number 16. So I do think, even though we were talking earlier about how people can't trust him, if he makes a deal, he actually follows through on it. I don't know if this is completely true, because that's not exactly what we saw in Vortex, right? With the twins.
He would make the effort of completing the deal, but everything after it is up for negotiation, or his interpretation.
Yeah, it seems like it's maybe his interpretation, or maybe if he sees a better deal, it's not so much that a deal is a deal, because the one with the twins, he was not making that deal.
Yeah.
But anyway, this firing of the phaser shockingly sets off an alarm in security.
Oh,
Has
finally.
this ever happened before?
Normally everybody disables them.
I know. The guy, he didn't have a little device that he plugged into something and disabled all security.
Yeah.
This is totally weird.
Yeah, you could have asked Quark for that.
Yeah, I could ask him for some security spark plugs. Odo calls for security to go to level 22, section 5. When they get there, Fallet just shoots at them. Meanwhile, Dax and Melora are coming back from the mission when they're intercepted by Fallet and Quark. But here, it's like, we didn't do anything when the phaser went off. Wouldn't we have sealed off the airlocks ASAP? Wouldn't we have stopped things from happening? Lock all the docking clamps? You know, come on.
Captive pursuit, where Odo manages to seal a section of the corridor with force fields.
You are so right. Why didn't we just do that? If we knew exactly where the phasers went off, you could just immediately seal that section off. Yeah, that's not good. Well, anyway, Fallet takes everyone hostage. Back into the runabout, he yells at Melora for moving too slowly. Dax explains she needs motor support in this gravity. Backing up, Sisko says to open a channel to the runabout, and when they don't respond, they hit the runabout with a tractor beam. Once that happens, Fallet tells Dax to call Sisko. He says, release the ship or I'll kill a hostage. When Sisko tries to negotiate, he just shoots Melora, which Julian sees.
Yeah.
He doesn't really react with the horror that I might have expected, especially since this is his new girlfriend.
Right.
And also someone that he's been treating, and now she just gets shot unceremoniously. Sisko tells Kira to beam him, Julian, and Miles to the Rio Grande, and then release the tractor beam after 10 seconds. And of course, nobody runs. They just saunter up to the transporter pad. The tractor beam is released, and Fallet tells Dax to go through the wormhole. When the runabout shakes, Fallet asks Dax what happened, and she says another ship came through the wormhole. He says, go to warp, just as we see Melora's hands start to move, so she is not dead. Dax says she can't go to warp, she's not set a course yet, and then they bicker about that for a bit. In the other shuttle, Miles says, oh hey, they're powering up warp engines. Stay with them, Sisko says. Bashir asks if we can beam them aboard at warp. Miles says he doesn't advise it.
Scotty figured out how to beam people at traveling at warp, didn't he?
Which would have happened before this. Fallet says, get phasers ready, but Dax crosses her arms and says she's not going to fire at them. He says you'll do it or you'll die. Dax stands up and says, fine, then I hope you can fly this ship. She now sees that Melora is not dead and is crawling around on the floor. She sits down and asks Quark how well he knows this guy, and Quark says, we've been friends for years, not counting today.
They managed to get a little levity in here. I do like that.
God, that was great. What a funny line.
Yeah.
She says, I suggest you explain to him that Starfleet isn't going to give up and stop chasing them. It's true, Quark says. You don't know these Starfleet types. Well, then we'll all die, he says. And then Melora pulls herself up just enough to hit a panel on the back wall and turn off the gravity, and everyone starts to float. By the way, she hits the gravity status button, which I honestly doubt is going to be one of the top 10 buttons that they'd make available with a single button press on the shuttle.
I will, in her defense, I will say maybe she reconfigured the shuttle so that she could turn gravity off easily.
That's true. Well, Dax manages to take them out of warp before she floats away from the panel. That was really cute.
Yeah.
Although the shuttle is very small, there's not really anywhere to go. They all sort of float up, but there's just enough room, apparently, for Melora to fly at Fallet's gut like Superman. I don't know how she got leverage. Maybe she pushed off from the back wall.
With very low gravity, yeah, this is totally her element.
This is her element, exactly. In the other shuttle, Miles says they've dropped out of warp and the gravity generators are off. Melora is alive, Bashir says. And Sisko and Bashir beam over to find Quark holding Fallet at gunpoint. Quark is like, it's all under control. That was cute.
Well, at least we can't blame Quark for this.
Well, yes we can. This is all Quark's fault. What are you talking about?
I mean, this wasn't a Quark plan that went wrong. This was...
True.
Yeah, Quark was trying to pay the guy off for what he'd done to him.
Yeah, okay. But he never ever pays for anything that he's done. In the last episode, remember, Kira said, this is it. Nothing happened.
Well, like I said, he probably got probation.
Now we go back to the station, and we're in the Klingon restaurant, and Melora and Bashir are talking. Bashir doesn't know why the phaser didn't kill her, but assumes it was all the neurostimulants they've been pumping into her body. It's an interesting side effect of the treatment. She stops him and says she doesn't want to continue the treatment.
Ooh, the showstopper.
Yeah. He says you can always try it again someday if you change your mind. She says she doubts she ever will. She liked being independent, but she wasn't ready to give up everything she was in order to walk on land. She says she wouldn't be an Elasian anymore if she did it. She says maybe independence isn't all it's cracked up to be. But she says she's glad she unlocked the doors to her quarters for him and let someone into her life.
Oh.
Then the Klingon chef starts to sing, which was, what the heck happened here? This is a very big guy singing. He's actually pretty good, but it just was weird.
I thought Klingon singing would be more like Klingon opera and very discordant.
Yes, but he's just singing like he's in a musical.
Yeah.
She takes Julian's hand and says she wants to remember all of this. The end.
Whoa, she's breaking up with him.
I guess so.
This is the most human he's been. And the look on his face when she sort of says that, it really is like disappointment of he kind of liked her. Like, really liked her.
He did. Well, I think she was his intellectual equal, or maybe even above him. I don't know. But yeah, I think he really did like her.
Even that's different from the Julian we've seen.
Yes, I agree. She says this one line in here about how she kind of liked how it felt to be dependent upon someone else for a change. Where did that come from? That made no sense to me.
I mean, maybe she just meant emotionally that she liked sharing with Julian.
And like depending on him, what, to help her get rid of the chair? I don't know.
That part
foggy
is
for
tough.
me here. Yeah, this is a little foggy.
Yeah, that part didn't make sense. I'll agree with you there.
Well, let's go to overanalysis since we hit the end of the episode. What's your overanalysis?
I think this episode is quite lacking in overanalysis. The few things that we talked about already were Dax's perspective on relationships, having lived so many lifetimes, would be truly odd to see what she thinks. And I think she should have had wings. They should have sprung for the budget. I mean, low gravity planet, they can fly. Wings would be the perfect method of controlling your direction. Being,
Sure.
having some kind of flight surface you could move.
Did you know that there was a plan to have a character like this as the science officer, but they decided that the expense was going to be too high?
Really? Like a character who would be in a wheelchair or?
Yep.
Oh.
Or in some kind of a chair or needed some kind of assistance to be on the station. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's very
interesting,
interesting.
right? Because I could have seen the long-term value of this character, sure.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be about perspectives and different peoples and experiences, etc. So it would make sense to have a character who is differently abled.
Yeah, it would have. Any other overanalysis?
Why does anybody do a deal with Quark? I mean, surely his name must have gotten around.
I know, it's such a good question.
Yeah. I guess this was a deal from his past, so he's probably got a lot of his past to catch up with him.
Yeah, and he was coming through on the other deal.
Yeah, although I'm expecting Quark actually got one of the bracelets and then just forged all the others.
Oh my gosh.
He's a Ferengi.
Or he stuck one in his pocket like he did in the last episode.
Yes, he'll wait until they paid all that money for the 39 of them, and then the 40th one, the final missing ones, will be found. Or the guy who's counterfeiting them, he didn't get the last one finished.
Right. Anything else?
That wraps up the analysis.
Well, let's go to women in the future. And this was a new female character, so that was cool. She started off as a bit of a stereotype, which we talked about, but she certainly evolved and made a decision that was right for her in the end, which I appreciated. It's so interesting to me that it was written by a person who's in a wheelchair because it really seemed like a stereotype in the beginning.
Yeah.
But we got over that and, it kind of improved.
I saw that as more just trying to write a character who wasn't terribly likable.
Yeah, I mean, I can't relate to the story, and obviously the person who wrote the story can, so far be it for me to argue with them. It just felt a bit reductive, but perhaps it was really representative of the frustration that he has felt in his life, and he was showing that in this character, so
I see.
I should probably accept it and not complain about it.
Yeah.
I think my one complaint in this episode about women in the future, well, I probably have two complaints. One complaint is that Carrie had one line.
She needs more.
Yeah, she only had one, maybe two lines. But my other complaint about women in the future is that idiotic conversation that they had on the shuttle about romance and love. This is like, these are science officers, these two people. They're going to talk about the sciencey stuff. And they didn't. Instead, they're in the shuttle talking about boys. And it was not good. There's a reason I didn't repeat it, because it was obnoxious and I didn't like it. And this is, my prerogative, my podcast, so I skipped right over it.
It did seem an oddly out of place at a high school girls talking about boys scene.
Yeah, it wasn't good. And also I would say the entanglements of Melora's heart were also a little bit reductive, a little bit simplified in that, I let him into my quarters and then we have this kiss in the air. And it's just like, oh my goodness, this is just so weak and so silly. But I think that's all I have for women in the future.
It was pretty standard fare for TV.
Yeah.
For network.
Agreed. Let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral? What is your rating?
It's getting a thumbs up for the severe amount of underboob.
You give it 5 underboobs out of 5.
Oh my God.
You're the one who said it.
Oh my gosh. I'm giving it a thumbs up because it was an enjoyable Star Trek.
It felt very Star Trek-y.
It felt like a TNG episode.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a TNG episode. I don't know. I enjoyed it more the second time through than I did the first time. I think I'd probably give it a neutral.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't super excited about it. At the same time, I do think about if they had built this character as a permanent character on the show, she could have been really interesting.
Yes.
As this actor or any actor, it didn't have to be her, but she could have been quite interesting to watch. So I did appreciate sort of that little nuance that I learned. But that's it. Okay, that is it for Season 2, Episode 6. Come back next week for Episode 7. In the meantime, if you'd like to tell us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, please email us at rebingeit@gmail.com or tweet us at rebingeit. Also, check us out on talkthroughmedia.com. You can leave feedback for us there too, and you can also listen to all of our other awesome podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.